Thank you everyone for being here and taking some time out of your evening to come down here and listen to me talk about Measure L. The reason we have this up there is so that you can look at that and hopefully enjoy reading what I'm saying as opposed to sitting and looking at me. The screen's going to be a whole lot nicer. I'm a county employee. I'm the Public Works and Water Resources Director for Wayne County. Bless you. And as a county employee, I can't campaign for a measure. And my role here today is to talk to you about the measure, the things that are in it, some of the details that are in it. And we have, as Olga explained, we have a couple of members of the Save the Lake Committee. All of the buttons and all of the information, the pamphlets, the banners, all of that information is available through the Save the Lake Committee. They have signs and interest things that you know, signatures that you can put on, you can sign to show you're interested in this. If you have any questions regarding the Save the Lake Committee, I would encourage you to talk to them, and we can certainly ask questions of them at any time here. I think it's important when we talk about Measure L, I think it's important to go back to Measure E and look at Measure E and use Measure E and some of the things that were in that to help compare the difference between Measure E and Measure L. So looking at the history of the previous measure, it was put before the voters in November of 2012. That ballot included Proposition 30 that proposed a statewide half-cent sales tax to fund education. It included Measure G, which was a proposed 1-cent sales tax increase in the city of Clear Lake. Measure E was a special tax. It required 67% voter approval, and the measure failed with 63% approval. It's important to note the difference between a special tax and a general tax. A special tax requires 67% voter approval, whereas a general tax only requires 50% voter approval. The difference is a special tax, the money can only be spent on the programs that are listed in the ballot initiative for that measure. A general tax, even though the governor said, I'm going to balance education, I'm going to put the money to education, and so far he's lived up to those promises. He's done a nice job in putting money and funds back into the educational system in California. But at any time, the governor or the legislation could say, we need to take that tax money and we need to go move it over here and do something else with it. And they have that prerogative because that was a general sales tax. And even though he sold it as, I'm going to do something with education, at any time in the future, he could change that and put those funds somewhere else. Measure E was a special tax. Measure L, the one that you're going to see in the ballot in June, is also a special tax. So the funds can only be spent on the programs that are listed. And we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. Again, we're continuing talking about Measure E. The previous measure had percentages broken down into various types of programs. And that measure, it had invasive species, aquatic weeds, and algae lumped into one big program, and they were going to dedicate 88% of the funding to that. 9% was going to go to water quality control programs, 2% was set aside for matching funds, capital projects, etc., and then 1% for the administrative expenses for the annual audit. The half-cent sales tax is projected to create $2.4 million annually in revenue, and using those percentages, you can see the numbers there at the bottom, the breakdown of the specific funds. Some of the criticisms of Measure E included the expenditure plan was too vague, and it only focused on weeds, algae, and invasive species. Well, 88% was going to those particular programs. The oversight committee was going to be hand-selected by the board, and it had too many politicians. The oversight committee reviewed the expenditures after the fact, and the money would get absorbed by the general fund, and none of it would go to the programs. Those were the main criticisms of the measure. So for the new Measure L, here are some of the things that have been done, some of the changes that have been put in that measure to address those criticisms. The measure requires the expenditure plan be submitted to the Oversight Committee and the Board of Supervisors in the spring prior to the new fiscal year. We just completed our preliminary budget. The county will adopt the budget in July or at the end of June for July 1. So this measure would require that I prepare an expenditure plan at least 90 days, and that's the language in the ballot initiative. It says at least 90 days prior to the adoption of the budget. So 3 months from June 30th, I would have had to have submitted the expenditure plan to the Oversight Committee and to the board. Knowing how long things take to get done, it's probably going to be wise for me to submit that draft plan more than 90 days in advance, especially for the first couple of years until we kind of get things rolling. It's probably going to need to be submitted way before 90 days before the adoption of the fiscal year. The Oversight Committee is made up of citizens from the county and both cities. The board will take nominations from existing committees and groups, including the City of Lakeport, City of Clear Lake, and you can read all of the existing committees and groups. But citizens are encouraged to apply for this. The board is a board-appointed committee, and so any citizen can fill out an application and say, I'd like to be on this committee, and you would be considered as a member. You would want to put down your specific background or specific skills or things that you had that would give you an advantage to being on that committee. The Oversight Committee meetings are subject to the Brown Act, so they're advertised, they're open to the public. There are no program-specific percentages. The annual plan will propose expenditures in areas of water quality programs, invasive aquatic species, prevention and control of aquatic weeds and algae, and the development of reserves for future capital projects. The expenditures, again, these are the things that are in the new Measure L. Even though this was already in Measure E, the expenditures are audited annually by either the county auditor controller or an outside firm to ensure compliance. The measure has a 10-year sunset clause. Measure E also had that. And in order for the sales tax to continue after the 10-year sunset clause, it will require another vote of the citizens. The measure is intentionally written with some flexibility to provide options for the various programs. The previous slide, I showed you some of the types of programs: water quality, invasive species. And so the program doesn't have specific percentages to go to those things, because 5 years from now, we really don't know what could be the problem. It could be weeds, could be algae, we just don't know. Or it could be neither. And we needed to put the funds into other types of projects or programs. So the measure is intentionally written with a little flexibility to provide options for those programs. The funds can only be spent on programs listed in the measure. The safeguard that's in the ballot initiative is the funds are going to go to the Watershed Protection District. The Watershed Protection District is a legal entity that was created by the legislature. The Department of Water Resources, the department I'm the department head of, we are responsible for the programs in the Watershed Protection District. Once funds go into the district, the funds have to be spent on district-related programs. All right, so general fund money, they could put general fund money, and they have done that. General fund helped make contributions to some of the weed abatement programs that we've run the last couple of summers. Those funds can come from the general fund and they can go into the Watershed Protection District, but it can't be vice versa. The funds that go into the Watershed Protection District cannot come out of the Watershed Protection District and be spent on non-Watershed Protection District programs. The measure provides funding for current programs, as well as provisions for stormwater monitoring, funding for the Middle Creek Marsh Project, and set aside funds for matching future grant opportunities. That last bullet, there's a couple of things that are really important there. Middle Creek Marsh, project that the county's been working on for a long time. It's a very expensive project. The Corps of Engineers will be paying the lion's share of it. The state will have a contribution. The state's, or our local contribution right now is up about $8 million. If the project were to happen tomorrow, we would not be able to do it because we don't have $8 million sitting in a reserve account for the project. In fact, we don't have the funds for the county's match for the project. Measure L would help set aside money for the county's match. The other thing, and I was talking to a gentleman before we got started about grant opportunities. There was a time when my department, the Watershed Protection District, did almost everything they do with grant funds. And the grant programs that used to be available would give you, they were 90% with a 10% match. So if you had a $100,000 project, you could apply for a $100,000 grant. They would give you 90, and if you could come up with a 10% match, then you were able to do a project. Those types of grants, those basically free money grants, are few and far between, and they're basically gone. Grant opportunities anymore are reimbursement grants. They'll give you the $90,000, but you have to pay for the project up front. So you have to have the money up front to do the project, and then they will reimburse you. And so that's a subtle but very important difference, because today, now to do a project, you have to have the 100 grand. All right? Many years ago, to do the project, as long as you had 10 and you applied for and you received the grant, then you were able to do the project. So subtle but pretty important difference. Measure L has a proposed year one expenditure plan. It's part of the ordinance. It's part of the ballot initiative. And it's proposed. If this expenditure plan is going to need to go through the process. It's going to need to go to the oversight committee for their review and their input. It's going to need to go to the board of supervisors for ultimate approval. But what we propose this year, or for year one, is under water quality programs, lake and stream monitoring as required by the state and federal permits, Burns Valley Creek dredging and stream bank restoration project. That's a project that the city of Clear Lake has been attempting to get funding for a number of years. The Clear Lake Keys wetland development, that was a project that we proposed for a grant 2 years ago. It didn't get funded. It's a project where we would divert the current ditch that flows along the Caltrans right-of-way that collects the majority of the drainage there in the Keys, or above the Keys, and dumps it right into the Keys there. We would propose to relocate that drainage and send it through a wetland. And then Middle Creek Marsh Restoration Reserves. And you can see the dollar figures that we've proposed for those programs. Invasive species, mechanical ramp controls, that's what we're proposing. Any type of ramp control is on the table, but the top priority for the use of the funding from this measure is the advancement of the invasive species program. Weed and algae program, we just used the numbers from work that we've done over the last couple of summers, and we've included that in there. And you can see that the proposed funding gets used up pretty quickly with, half a dozen projects there. Some examples of projects for future expenditure plans. Stream restoration and modification projects to provide detention areas for sediment reduction. If you've ever seen those pictures of plumes of sediment coming out from the mouths of creeks after a big storm event, that's all nutrients. That's all sediment that's has the nutrients attached to it. It's going out into the lake, and that's what helps feed the weeds and the algae. We would, with additional funds, we would be able to propose projects where we could modify the streams, we could do different things to try to reduce that sediment loading. Highland Springs Conjunctive Use Project, project that we've had on the books for a number of years now. We actually sent that to the voters that were in that flood zone several years ago, and it was defeated. The Highland Springs Conjunctive Use Project is a project where we would modify the outlet structure at Highland Springs would allow us to store more water in the reservoir in the wintertime for release later in the spring. And what it would do is it would help with the groundwater recharge. Very important topic today, considering the drought that we're in. There's been a lot of emphasis on the groundwater values, where we're at with the aquifers. A project like that would certainly help benefit the groundwater recharge. As a secondary benefit, it's very likely that we would help improve some of the habitat for the Clear Lake hitch in Adobe Creek, because we would be able to release water later in the spring and hopefully help those fish get their business done in the creek and their spawning. Another example of a project for future expenditure plans would be expanded groundwater basin management. Again, a very hot topic. Just about every day we see something from the state where they're talking about they want local entities to do groundwater management. And again, it's being triggered by the drought. We do some basic groundwater basin management. We monitor wells in 5 or 6 groundwater basins. We do it twice a year. I made a presentation to the board here a month or so ago. But the state is asking local entities to do more for groundwater basin management. Invasive species prevention, believe it or not, Lake County's at the kind of the leading edge of invasive species programs. There are a lot of municipalities and especially public lakes that aren't doing anything, and we're really trying to take the bull by the horns and protect our facility. And again, I mentioned I was at the state today talking with the State Invasive Species Council, and there's no glimmer of hope on the horizon for funds or for the state doing anything differently to help protect or help reduce or help monitor or control boat movement out of infested water bodies. Our argument is you folks the state should be controlling those boats and keeping them from coming from infested areas. And basically the state doesn't think they need to do that, and they're putting all the responsibility of the protection of water bodies on the local entities. The Board of Supervisors, there's a couple of supervisors that are very interested in exploring choke points on roads entering into the county. That would be an example of a project that could be considered in the future. Weed and algae programs, there's more and more technology being developed with anaerobic digesters and different things for the development of alternative energies, using weeds, algae, food waste. There's lots and lots of options here, and that would be an example of a project that we can potentially pursue. So why do we need a sales tax measure? Well, I can tell you that the current revenues don't support the programs. My department's been in deficit spending the last 2 years. We've been living off reserves to fund the programs, and it's not sustainable. And eventually, and this proposed budget that I just submitted to the board a couple weeks ago is no different. I have 2 budget units that are about $200,000 out of balance, with more expenditures than revenue, and we're making up that difference with reserves. Well, very soon I'm going to run out of reserves, and so something's going to need to change. And that last bullet says we can live within our means, and we can, but it's going to require a reduction in services and certainly no advancement in the invasive species program. The public demands for increased services. The state and federal agencies continue to add programs and conditions on water quality that require action. They require monitoring. They require plans. And we are not doing those things because, frankly, we just don't have the funding to do them. So one of the big reasons why the sales tax measure is in place is because We recognize that the state and federal government is not going to help us. They're not going to send money this way. They're not going to make grants available. We apply for them. We don't get them. The current climate in California today is counties are needing to take care of themselves. And it's not just water quality programs. I'm also the public works director, and the funds and the gasoline tax revenues that come to our county to help maintain the roads, they're on the decline. Every alternative energy vehicle that gets built is less gasoline that's being sold, and that's less revenue coming back to the counties. So, and the thing is those vehicles are heavy because they're electric. They have a lot of big batteries. They're heavy vehicles. They put wear and tear on the road, but they don't buy gasoline, and that's the purchase of gasoline is what helps fund road maintenance. So the funding programs that are available in transportation are almost all geared towards self-help counties, which are counties that have done sales tax measures and are putting in some of their own money. I mentioned earlier that the primary objective of our department and one of the top priorities of the expenses for any funds from Measure L is the expansion of the invasive species program. You probably heard presentations about the quagga mussels and the things that they'll do to the ecosystem, the things that they'll do to the fishery. The property values are going to decrease because of the perception that the lake's infested. And as property values go down, it affects everybody. The thing that's, I think, really, really important is that last bullet, and that is if you live in a community where the water system pulls water from the lake, and if you live here in Lucerne, that water company pulls water from the lake. Those water companies are going to be faced with a lot of additional expenses. They're going to have a lot of cleaning that they're going to need to do to clean the mussels out of the intake pipes. They're going to have a lot of additional treatment of the raw water to kill the veligers and to kill the stuff that's in the water. A lot of additional expense, and they're not going to eat that. They're going to pass that on to the consumer. They're going to pass that on to the folks that buy water. So our water rates are going to go up if you are on a system that pulls water from the lake. Some advantages of the sales tax measure. Sales tax applies only to the purchase of goods and not groceries, utility bills, rental or mortgage payments, or prescription medications. One other thing, I was doing some additional research yesterday, and one thing that I didn't put on there, it doesn't apply to gasoline sales either. They already tax gasoline, so a special use or sales tax doesn't apply to gasoline. The sales tax will get paid when visitors purchase stuff in Lake County. So they come to our wineries, they come to our big events, and they buy things. Visitors are going to be helping pay that sales tax. Again, we talked a little bit about the Committee to Save the Lake. They're here, and we can certainly try to answer some questions if you have them. They have a great website. It's www.savethelake.info. A lot of information. The ordinance is the language of the ordinance is on their website. I would encourage you to take a look at that. It's not reasonable for me to stand here and say, well, my goal today is to change everybody's mind in this room and have them vote for that measure. That's not going to happen. All right, that's not. But what I hope can happen is that you'll listen to this, you'll take a look at this with an open mind. Go visit that website and go ask questions. You're welcome to call me in my office and ask me questions. I'll tell you what I know. But get informed and please look at it with an open mind, and hopefully things will work out in June.